You say goodbye to a friend and walk home. The conversation wasn't bad, but your mind isn't carrying the whole evening, just one sentence. The conversation might be over, but your mind still doesn't count it as over. And here's the strange part. The more you try to close it, the more often it comes back. So why can't you close it? You send a message and it just says seen underneath, no reply, and your mind starts guessing why 5 different ways, or a friend hangs up the phone a little faster than usual, and you're stuck wondering if something's wrong. This tends to happen more in people who pay closer attention to social cues, especially if during a conversation you're focused less on the other person and more on your own voice, your appearance, or the impression you're leaving. You're more likely to replay that conversation later. On its own, that's not a problem. But if it happens after almost every conversation, disrupts your sleep, or makes you avoid people, it might be more than just being attentive. There's a possible explanation for why your mind does this. When a conversation ends clearly, they smiled, you understood each other, everything felt normal, your mind marks it as done and lets it go. But when it ends without a clear signal, the tone was a little off, the reaction was unclear. Your mind treats it differently, like a tab you forgot to close, and your mind doesn't do this with the whole conversation. It picks one moment, a pause, a look, the way a word was said, skips over the laughs and easy parts, and gets stuck on exactly that unclear second. Your mind seems to give more weight to socially uncomfortable or unclear moments than to ordinary safe ones. That's why almost an entire hour of an easy conversation can fade, while one strange pause can stay far more prominent, sometimes pulling in other odd memories from the past along with it. Have you noticed this mostly happens at night or when you don't have much going on? During the day, your attention is elsewhere. But at night, or in a quiet moment, the empty space in your mind fills up with that unfinished conversation, kind of like a phone that's been silent all day, showing every notification the second it goes quiet. Why a conversation and not a grocery list? Because not knowing how someone sees you isn't a small mystery. Underneath it is a bigger question. Are we okay? Your mind treats that question as far more important than a forgotten grocery list. So why does this bother some people so much more than others and barely bother some at all? Part of it may come down to how well someone tolerates uncertainty. Some people can carry an unclear situation for weeks without it bothering them. Others feel a need for an answer within hours. Good or bad, they just want it to be clear. That's not a weakness, it's a difference in how people relate to not knowing. Think about the last time you didn't hear back from someone. Did you shrug it off, or did you need to know why within the hour? If you're closer to the second group, an unfinished conversation can weigh on you far more than it does on someone else. But there's another assumption hiding here that's easy to miss. Because you still remember that moment so clearly, you assume the other person remembers it just as much. In one study, participants were asked to put on a genuinely embarrassing t-shirt and walk into a room full of people. Afterward, they were asked to guess how many people in the room had noticed the shirt. They guessed far higher than the real number. Most people in that room were caught up in their own concerns and barely noticed it at all. Something similar can happen with conversations. While you're carrying that pause around for hours, the other person was probably caught up in their own words, their own appearance, and may have already forgotten the moment entirely. That doesn't mean they definitely forgot, but assuming they remember it exactly as much as you do is usually wrong. Go back to that friend you walked home from. There's a real chance they're not replaying anything at all. They've already moved on to whatever came next in their evening. Here's something strange. Thinking things through usually gets you somewhere, to a decision, an understanding, but this kind of replaying doesn't. It doesn't go anywhere. You watch the same few seconds with the same uncertainty over and over. You're not moving forward. You're spinning in place. Sometimes your mind doesn't just replay what happened, it starts writing other versions of it. I wish I'd said this instead. I should have replied differently. I could have been warmer. This isn't about being able to change the past. Your mind seems to be rehearsing the moment, trying to feel more prepared for next time, a kind of rehearsal. But at some point, that rehearsal stops teaching you anything new. It's just looking for a better version of the same scene. There's a simple question worth asking yourself. Is this thought giving me new information or something concrete I can actually do? If the answer is no, you're not solving anything anymore, you're just replaying the scene. On top of that, replaying the conversation again doesn't necessarily give you a more accurate record. Memory doesn't work like a security camera recording. Every time you recall something, some of your fears and interpretations from that moment can blend into the memory itself. So, thinking about the conversation for the 10th time might not be getting you closer to the truth. Thinking about it more doesn't mean you're reaching a more accurate conclusion. It just makes your own story feel more familiar. So, what if you just tried not to think about it? That usually backfires. Try it right now for the next 5 seconds. Don't think about a red door. Notice what just happened? When you deliberately try not to think about something, part of your mind keeps checking in the background. Am I thinking about it? And that checking brings the thought back even stronger. Interestingly, one way to reduce this might be to stop watching yourself during the conversation in the first place. Like we mentioned, the more you focus on yourself, on how you're coming across, the more likely you are to replay that conversation afterward. So next time, trying to actually listen to the other person instead of monitoring how you're presenting yourself might keep that moment from becoming a scene to replay in the first place. Really, it comes down to not mixing up two separate things. I remember this clearly is not the same as the other person remembers it just as much. And I keep thinking about this is not the same as I'm arriving at new, more accurate information. So what can you actually do? Let's walk through the same example through all 3 steps. You send a message. It says seen underneath, no reply. Step 1 is naming the loop. I'm not solving anything new right now. I'm just checking the same message over and over in my head, just noticing that loosens it a little. Step 2 is separating what you know from what you're guessing. What you know, they saw the message. They didn't reply. What you're guessing, maybe they're upset, maybe they're busy, maybe they forgot. You don't actually know which. Writing these down as 2 separate lines on paper helps separate the social uncertainty from the story your mind is making up. Step 3 is deciding. Is there something real you can actually do about this? If so, message them again in a few hours or just ask directly, is everything okay? If not, if waiting is really all you can do, say to yourself, this is all I know, the rest is guessing. Then shift your attention somewhere else. Put your phone down, walk into another room. And one more thing, you don't have to do this alone. Sometimes just telling someone you trust, this happened and it's still stuck in my head, is enough to let your mind set it aside. Go back to that walk home, that sentence still sitting in your head. Now you know something you didn't before. Your mind isn't reopening that conversation because it was unimportant. It's reopening it because it never found a clear ending. But not every uncertainty gets resolved. Not every silence or every unanswered message has one definite meaning. Sometimes closure doesn't come from a new answer from the other person. Sometimes it's separating what you know from what you're guessing and deciding not to carry the rest. The conversation may already be over. Now you can let your mind finish it too.